barbaric witch tests that were basically impossible to pass. Witch hysteria went on for hundreds of years. The last recorded execution in Europe happened in 1782, when Anna Goldie was killed in Switzerland. Over 100,000 people were condemned for witchcraft and executed for it. Identifying a witch became an art, and the alleged witches of the past were subject to barbaric trials and tribulations, and trying to deny witchcraft was near impossible due to the number of tests that were impossible to pass. One of the most violent of tests included being pricked and scratched to see if they bled like a normal non-witch person. The idea was designed to see if the devil had left a visible mark on the witch's body. Women with birthmarks suffered greatly. They were suspected more often and subjected to pricking while stripped naked. Although even those without birthmarks suffered, with hunters believing that the marks were hidden and that pricking and scratching could reveal a marking. But often it would just cause the mark. The witches were seen to not feel pain, and so this torment was made even more agonizing. The witch hunters would purposely choose less sensitive spots that would bleed less in order to declare the woman as a witch. A popular needle used was that of the Scottish pricking needle. It had emerged from an industry obsessed with pricking. People took up the role of a pricker as a career, and the men who did it were con men looking for an easy source of income. Even women that needed money would dress up as a man to undertake the role as a witch pricker. This is true of Christian Cadell, who disguised herself as a man. She was hired in 1662 to accuse witches. Her motive was money, and she was paid well, at least 6 times the average wage at the time. She would then get commission on top for every witch that she identified, only motivating her to point the finger more often. A royal court messenger petitioned to have her arrested for her illegal activities of condemning innocent people to death for money. She had condemned at least 6 people by this point. She pricked him, and then she was banished to the colony of Barbados. Another impossible test was to weigh the accused against the Bible. As witches were suspected of flying away on a broomstick, they had to be light enough to do this, and so would be lighter than a Bible. Most towns at the time had weigh-houses that were usually used for crops and livestock in the markets. These were then used by witch hunters to condemn innocent women. These weigh-houses were increasingly used solely to weigh the wicked. The witches were not weighed against a single Bible, they were weighed against a stack of Bibles, making the test almost impossible to pass. If they were lighter than a stack of Bibles, they were accused of practicing black magic, so God forbid being skinny during these times. There was no set rule of how many Bibles, and it was different per trial, making it disgustingly biased, and many were condemned this way. Another test of witchcraft was a witch cake that had made of urine and fed to dogs. This was a popular method used during the Salem witch trials, which was then spread into England and throughout Europe. It was so popular that it became a primary method to find witches. Those under a witch spell would urinate into a mixture of rye flour and ash, and this would then be fed to a dog. Dogs were associated with the devil in the form of a familiar, and if the dog became ill after eating the concoction, the results were used to condemn women of witchcraft, as it would show the victim was telling the truth and in fact been put under a spell. The dog would then be used to sniff out the witch responsible. Another test was the famous swimming test, which included tying up a witch and throwing them into the water to see if they would float or not. The idea behind this test was similar to the weighing of the Bible. The weight of a witch would be so light that they would float, and this was the most popular test during the 16th and 17th century, and led to the drowning of hundreds of women. This was a lose-lose situation. Those that sunk would drown, and would be cleared of all charges, and those that would float would be condemned as witches and killed. Women were taken to the nearest body of water and were publicly stripped down to their undergarments. Their hands were bound together and they were dumped into the water to see if they would float. Another idea was that the water would reject a real witch, hence why the person would float. Water is a sacred element from the Bible, and so religious beliefs suggested that evil creatures would be forced to the top of the water. We now know that a human can and should float on water, and it is the best way to survive a drowning accident. But innocent victims would often drown, but attempts were made to rescue the innocent by tying a rope around their torso. Bystanders were not the quickest at making a verdict of not guilty, and so many people were deemed innocent too late and drowned. The 18th century saw a decline in the violence and bloodshed of witch trials, and a greater set of evidence was required to condemn someone of a crime, and so the hysteria and witch trials became obsolete. Witch hunting had been part of culture, and it left an everlasting impact on society through films, art and more. Please comment, like and subscribe if you wish for more stories, and leave your suggestions below and I will endeavour to cover them.